Steve Forbes coming up, my candidate for president, 1996. Probably didn't know that Steve Forbes, I know you know who he is, right? Everybody knows who Steve Forbes is. You probably don't remember that he won 2 primaries, Arizona and Delaware. And he was well on his way to winning New Hampshire in 96. Pat Buchanan actually won that state, but he was way ahead. And he was surging ahead in January when, Haley Barbour at the RNC got all upset because Forbes was winning. And Forbes was from the outside, wasn't part of the Bob Dole establishment, and told him to stop running negative ads and called his campaign manager, Bill Dow, call up. I remember all this stuff. I got a memory like a steel trap, called him up and met with him in New Jersey and said, you can't run these negative ads on Bob Dole. And, he's going to win and then he's going to be tarnished and et cetera all. Of course, Bob Dole had no chance of beating Bill Clinton. So Steve Forbes is just a nice guy. So he says, all right, I'll take the negative ads down. And then Bob Dole went up and Buchanan put negative ads on and won. It's like, go figure, right? So then he turns around and he wins Arizona. This is a true story. This is 96. You probably don't remember this. So Forbes wins the Arizona primary. He was champion, like he was the only candidate for like economic growth back then. He was champion of flat tax. Wins Arizona, and I was there, and he comes down, I think it was in Phoenix or Tucson, I don't remember where. But he comes down to the podium, and he was like way behind, and all the pundits had written him off. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, the era of political punditry is dead. I'll never forget that. All this stuff sticks in my mind. And he is joining us now. He's got a new PBS show coming out. Steve Forbes, great to have you, Steve.
Good to be with you, going down memory lane like that. Wow.
Now, do you remember all that? And then you won Delaware, and I was there for that also. And that was a blowout, and nobody expected you to win that either. But the Arizona victory, I mean, you had come from way behind, and you won that. And I remember that speech. It was so funny. You said the era of political punditry is officially dead. Remember that?
I do indeed, and it should have been over. We saw it in 2015, 2016, 20 years later when the pundits said this crazy guy Trump is going nowhere. We see how right they were then.
I know, and then also I got to give you just one other story. Because Steve Forbes, I love that campaign. It was so much fun, and it was so pro-growth, and it was just fun. And everywhere you went, I think you started out in the polls like at 1% or something, and then you were gaining. But then another story, you were at the Florida straw poll. Steve, you had the Florida straw poll in Orlando, right? They used to have this straw poll thing.
Right.
I think it was October, November. And like you were given this banger speech and, blasting all the other candidates because they had no policies for economic growth. And they cut you off, remember? They cut the mic off, right? And you were like talking and and they cut you off because they said you were over your time by 8 seconds. And like every other candidate went over their time. I think Phil Graham was up there for like an hour and a half. And they cut your mic off at like 9 seconds over. And just when you were getting to the end, there's all that stuff that I remember. The thing was so rigged against you. Anyway, Steve, before we get into economics and stuff, you've got a new PBS show coming out. Can you tell everybody what it is?
Yeah, it's called In Money We Trust. It's a documentary, a little over 50 minutes, and it deals with the subject in a very straightforward way that is shrouded in mystery, but it makes the point that the creation of money, starting 2,500 years ago, when money has a fixed value, when it is trusted, economies flourish. That's how we got the invention of philosophy with Athens, right up to the high-tech revolution today. When money is trustworthy, we move ahead. When the politicians start fooling around with it, which has plagued us for decades now, we have not only economic growth that isn't what it should be, but also we get more social divisions. People don't understand why they're not moving ahead. So it's great human achievement happens when we have good money, and bad things happen, as we saw with Germany in the early 20s when the money went bad, which made possible the rise of Adolf Hitler. We see it in Venezuela today. Mm-hmm. And even in our own country, even though our economy is doing well, we'd be doing surprisingly even better, especially on workers' wages, if the dollar was totally trustworthy, and the Federal Reserve is not doing the job it should. But it's a good document. Every school should see this thing. It explains money. Money just makes it easier to buy and sell with each other. When it's done right, we prosper. When it's done wrong, bad things happen. And the amazing thing is it's on public television. You can find it online in moneywetrust.org. In moneywetrust.org. It's right there online. You can pop it up and watch it at your convenience.
In moneywetrust.org, Steve Forbes. Let's talk a little bit about the Trump economy. Regulations have been cut at a massive rate, 27 cut for every one that's put in. We've now got growth in 2018 that appears it's going to be well over 3%, continuing that into 2019. Steve Forbes, about a month ago, all of the economic pundits told us that job growth would be a disaster because of the shutdown. We have about 150,000 jobs created. We got 300. Wages, they all said would go down. It's been up 3.5%. What is going on with the Trump economy? And Steve, how do these tax cuts play into it?
Well, maybe when I gave that speech in Arizona you referred to about political pundits, I should have included economic pundits too.
Yes.
The accuracy of their predictions. No, the shutdown of the government was inconvenient, disruptive for some people, hurt some contractors, but overall, given the massive size of the American economy, didn't have much impact at all. And you're right about deregulation, John. Regulation is a form of taxation. And when you remove unnecessary and burdensome rules, especially small businesses, this economy really comes to life. And we've seen it in the areas of drug approvals, new medicines coming on, removing bureaucratic red tape while improving quality, allowing the Internet to flourish again. All these good things, allowing the coal industry to revive again. All that's good stuff. And the tax cuts, by enabling individuals to keep most individuals, you never know it from the mainstream or lamestream media, but 90% of American taxpayers got a tax break. Businesses got a reduction, which means that we're getting some more investment again. And when we remove, as I think we will, the uncertainty surrounding, especially a trade deal with China, I do think where we're going to get one in the next few months, you're going to see this economy do extremely well. It'll make the Red Sox look like they're a last place team by the time this economy gets going.
Things were going great. Things were going fine for us until you had to bring the Red Sox up and remind me that their the Boston 90-day drought of not winning a championship ended a week ago. I guess that's what they told me.
Yes, they're rather spoiled up there. I'm a Yankees fan, so this is a sensitive subject too. And you're in the area where we're all wondering what's going to happen to Mr. Harper.
Well, I'm an Astros fan, so the Yankees and Astros have had their tough times with each other in the past couple seasons when we finally got a good team, but I don't think Harper's going back to Washington. I guess he's going to San Francisco or Philadelphia. That's what I've heard.
Yeah, but since it's taken so long, yesterday the Wall Street Journal had an amusing piece where they offered him a place on their softball team.
Well, he's not going to have anything to do. I mean, he's asking for so much money, and the problem is you sign him, and then you can't sign anybody else. That's the issue that some of these teams have with these big free agents coming up, so it does put him in a bind. Let's get to the deal on the table right now. Steve Forbes with us, and don't forget, inmoneywetrust. Is it .org or .com?
.org.
.org. inmoneywetrust.org. You want to go to that. It's also on PBS. And Steve Forbes with us. Everybody knows Steve. He's run for president 2 times, 96 and 2000, and the chairman of Forbes magazine and all that good stuff. Also has a wonderful family and just one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And, Steve, I look back at that campaign when I followed it. I ran around there with you and Del Cole and John McLaughlin. That was such a fun time. 96 was fun. 2000, not so much. That was totally rigged. But 96 was a lot of fun. And I've always remembered those days because it was kind of like Trump, because you were from the outside. Of course, I was for him from the beginning. You're from the outside, and you were talking about things that no one was talking about, which just made it so much fun. And then finally, where you got a fair shot in the media, like Arizona and Delaware, you started to win. Remember, you went to New York and you got the endorsement of Jack Kemp in 96.
Right.
And remember, the Dole people went nuts. Remember that?
I do indeed. And Jack Kemp ended up, when Dole won the nomination, ended up on the ticket as his vice presidential nominee. But, yeah, we had fun with the flat tax, and even though we still don't have it in this country, amazingly, since then, 35 other countries around the world have the flat tax today, and it's worked very well. And so hopefully we'll get this. And one thing about Donald Trump, he is the one kind of individual who would go for something like that. The traditional politicians won't, but he's got the mindset that might go for something like that.
Well, they would never go for it because it ends all the lobbyists, which then ends all the flow of money going into both parties. So it ends the Incumbent Protection Act. And that's really what you're fighting up there, is the lobbyists that have special interest on this loophole or that loophole. And the problem is the flat tax. It all goes away. It is what it is. Let's get to the deal on the table that it appears, Steve Forbes, that the Republicans and Democrats have negotiated to keep the government open. Not a done deal, but it appears to be $1.375 million for the barrier for the president. Do you think he should sign it?
Probably should, because even though people are going to say, oh, he asked for 5 and he got less than that, it includes that money will finance pretty quickly 55 miles of a modern physical barrier along the border with Mexico. And having that barrier there, when people see it, they're going to say, what was the big deal? It makes all the sense in the world. So I see it as seed corn. As you already know, we have barriers in Southern California, San Diego, between San Diego and Mexico. And these things properly done work. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of the border where those things can work. Mm-hmm. And having that 55-mile demonstration, I think next year and the year after, it sets the stage for what's your hang-up? It works. Get over it.
And, I mean, the specter of another government shutdown, I mean, that's not a good thing for the economy. I mean, even though we kind of got over it in January, I mean, I don't see where that's particularly
Well, what it does is what ultimately happens is it then gets to things that really impact people, like airports. That was really got people upset when TSA might not get paid. And things like that. So, get that demonstration, that 55 miles, and people are going to scratch their heads, what was the big deal? Mm-hmm. And so it sets the stage. Mm-hmm. And this shows the president's playing a long game, too.
The economics of the president's trade policies, especially with China, getting back to the pundits, a lot of people saying that it would prove to be a disaster for the economy if we couldn't sell soybeans or whatever. We've seen the exact opposite of, again, what the pundits have said. The president's trade policies, I know we're at odds with that. I'm a protectionist. You're an open free trader. How do you reconcile that, Steve Forbes?
Well, I think the big issue is, which they have focused on finally after all of these years, is trade abuses by China. Stealing technology, forced mergers, forced transfer of know-how, all of those abuses. And I think the most effective thing has not been the tariffs per se. A tariff is another word for sales tax, is we finally got around to prosecuting individuals who are doing bad things, going after companies that were doing bad things like Huawei and TZE. And you go after them, you start doing arrests, you start doing shutdowns. I think they're going to go after a couple of banks where you shut them off from the international payment system and in effect shut them down. When you do those specific things and get our allies to go along because they suffer from the same abuses, that's when China is open to doing a deal. And that's why I think in the next, we'll have a big to-do about March 1st. But I think looking out between now and, say, Memorial Day, I think you're going to get a major deal where, among other things, the Chinese now know that we're going to go after specific abuses, but also they're going to agree to buy a lot of our natural gas, among other things. I think you're going to see a deal involving hundreds of billions of dollars of sales that we don't have today. So, the president's going to look pretty good after that, and the pundits are going to be saying, well, they're going to complain about something else. I don't know what.
You got to watch Steve's PBS special, InMoneyWeTrust.org. Steve Forbes, InMoneyWeTrust.org. Can I tell one more fast 1996 campaign story?
Yep.
So Bob Dornan is running for president, right? Bullet Bob from
that's right. Yes.
Orange County. I got to stop laughing when I say this. Bullet Bob from Orange County, California, he ended up getting beaten his seat in November 96, but he's running for president 95, 96, and he has no money, right? So he's got to get to these political events, right? Florida, straw poll, whatever you guys were doing. So he would pick up the phone and he would call Steve up and ask if he could get a ride on his plane to go to the various campaign events. Then he would come on there with his entourage, wouldn't pay for any of it. And Steve is just a nice guy. I'd say, sure, Congressman, no problem. And he'd bring his whole staff, and they would eat all of his food on the plane going down. And then he'd want a ride back, and he'd be like, can you drop me off in Washington? And Steve Forbes, so nice, would just let Bob on the plane and wouldn't charge him anything. That was, I got to tell you. And we were all saying, like, why are you letting Bob Dornan on your campaign plane? See, Steve, you're just too nice.
Well, he was a great guy. He was going nowhere in the campaign, and principled man, and I like the guy.
I know you did. So. He would come on your campaign plan with his whole staff, all three of them. Steve Forbes, thanks. And then he would eat all your food. John Fredericks Radio Network.
Well, it wasn't health food, chicken wings and the kind of things that sustain you on a campaign, Doritos, kind of things that sustain you on a campaign trail.
That's the way to eat, though, on those airplanes. You had always the best stuff. John Fredericks Radio Network, Steve Forbes with us. Hey, you got to check this out, InMoneyWeTrust.org. Hey, Steve, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for the memory lane. Thank you.